Hey there, welcome to the Game Artist Podcast. My name is Ryan Kingsline. I am the founder of Vertex School, where we train creatives for the career of their lives. In this podcast, we interview amazing creatives to see what makes them tick and see how they got where they are today. So sit back, relax. I look forward to sharing their journey with you.
First Spider-Man products that Sony put out in collaboration with MTV, and you'll kind of see how things start to change. And you compare this to Sony's products now, and they're just absolutely amazing. But this is what it was like over a decade ago. You know, you still had toon shading, but everything was a lot lower quality, as you can see. And so yeah, from 3D, I was always inspired by the original Resident Evil, uh, Final Fantasy VII, obviously Metal Gear, and I really wanted to get into games because that was my passion. And so I left the television industry and 3D animated industry, and I started working at FIFA. And so back then you could see that it was all about low poly texturing and trying to maximize uh, the illusion of having this grand stadium, but using it on a really small budget. And things have changed so much since then. Now the machines are super powerful and the consoles are really robust, and the quality bars are going higher and higher. And with that, education has gotten easier in some areas and a lot more detailed in other areas. And along with that comes different requirements for all the type of art we create. So yeah, today I was going to talk a lot about like what does it mean to actually be an artist in the game industry. And as much as we all love to create beautiful art, there's other things that are involved with making it meaningful and performant to the game.
That's great. And you mentioned the quality bar is higher, and that's a big part of what we focus on. It's a big part of what I focus on these days, because we like to make sure our students know, and everybody knows, in our industries, there's not really a labor shortage like there is in programming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's what they call a talent shortage. I do not like the word talent, but I understand what they mean by that. And that there's a certain level that you have to reach. But it's not always what people think. Sometimes people think it's anatomy or something like that, but there's more to it that's being looked at. So I'd love to hear more about what you have to say there.
Absolutely. Like over the years, I've obviously had a lot of interviews and written a lot of job descriptions about what we need to have in terms of a skill set in various different departments. I started as a modeler in like soft image, and over the years, you kind of start to wonder, it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do next? How can I be competitive in the industry? And so I started to go into TD work. And even though there's a lot of security in doing scripting and pipelines and technical direction, whether you're specializing in characters or rendering or anything like that, you ultimately still need to keep up all your skills, right? And so like I think a great point of discussions that we can start with is like what makes an applicant stand out, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this sea of competition, and competition has changed quite a lot, like with ArtStation and just different mediums and social media where you can get yourself out there and your work out there. But I think also what has changed for the better is not just the software, but you can see it now with having to do more, quarantine, kind of stay from home. There's a lot of people that are affected, and there's a lot of people that it's less affected because most of the work right now that is happening in indie studios as well as some of the big studios is remote. And so talent it doesn't necessarily have to be restricted to where you live. or even language barrier at this point. This is one thing that we focus on at Pixelmatic, being a very distributed team. We work from Shanghai, Vancouver, California, France, Japan, Italy, Philippines, and talent. If it's the right talent, you can get it from anywhere, and it doesn't matter about whether they're sitting at a desk next to you or not. I think the industry is now more than ever embracing that. So when it comes down to what makes a good artist and a good fit for a project, it really comes down to not just talent, but communication, and ability to adapt and learn and understand how their contribution fits into the bigger picture of the game.
Got it. Communication. But if we dive into that, because, my job, I run a school. We use in order to guide the students and ourselves to the curriculum, we use what we call hiring triggers. And so these are things like saying character art. It's, you got to have your high resolution at a certain level. Or I think an easier example is if we look at texturing, is your texturing all ZBrush poly paint? You're not a job candidate. That's not a trigger for hiring. But if I'm looking at somebody's texture and you see that they've got gradients on there, they've got color variation, value variation, and the hue is within a certain range, those are hiring triggers. I know that they understand, texturing, not just in terms of software, but in terms of actual craft.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you see as some of the hiring triggers in general, just for game artists?
Value for sure, like you're talking about texture values and color values, but also I really like to look for, and this is something that I kind of look back and question a lot for my career, is like, what is the value of specialization over being a generalist? And back in the day, being a generalist was really helpful because there wasn't as much high-end software, and so you learned a lot. But being a specialist, I think not only things like color values, but being able to showcase your work appropriately is like something I don't see quite a lot of, even to this day on ArtStation. Is 50% of the stuff that is posted doesn't even show what wireframe, right?
Right.
And like the more people can show not just all of your texture passes, but also you use Armazat Viewer or like even SketchUp, and just be able to showcase the full spectrum of what their model is. But as an artist, like when it comes to functional art, and this is something I talk a lot about at my various jobs, is knowing where to add detail and where not to, relevant to the game that you're making, is super important. So even right here in this old video of Company of Heroes is, when you do start to work on your demo reel, or when you do have a goal about where you want to end up, try to be very clear about what your intention is. Not just making a pretty piece of art, but if your goal is to get into RTS, then you're looking at isometric cameras. You're looking at lower poly, but faking it with really good normal maps and surfaces, right? Versus if you're trying to get into first-person shooter, like these are all the kinds of things that it doesn't just come down to textures and values of the things, that the metallic values and the distribution of the dirt, but it comes down to what is your goal.
And matching that with your studio. We talk about that. We have our students kind of establish a North Star.
Yeah.
So they know where to go. So you mentioned that there's a lot of opportunity in this industry, and that's a hard thing, especially right now, for us to be thinking about, because, and it's all new. Like I've had students take art tests, and then they've gotten notes back like, we love the art test, but we don't know what's going on right now, so we're just on hold. Then I've had some people say, that junior level employees is sometimes that's a little bit hard because they need a lot of management and mentoring to become fully functional. So there's a lot of words that I'm hearing about this. But then I have students, one of my students just got a job at Apple,
Hmm.
And, that's a totally different career now,
Oh yeah, yeah.
but he started as a game artist. He came out of our boot camp and now he's at Apple. Yay. So where are the opportunities? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Um, I've personally been looking at a lot of portfolios and resumes off of, it doesn't matter where their location is,
Mm-hmm.
off of ArtStation and off of just Twitch, because I feel that even though finding work right now in these times is difficult, I think the key to having more success, to landing even a part-time contract, is just getting out there and being visible. And so like, I don't think that people are stopping looking for people when there is talent, the right talent. Companies, AAA companies in particular, will make room for the right candidates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we are in like some uncertain times, but I don't think that means that any developers close the doors and their eyes to finding the right people at all.
Hmm. That makes sense because
Yeah,
they're always on
and
that hunt.
yeah, and it's interesting now when you see a lot of social media about just the something as simple as Steam sales. Is
Right.
we work in an entertainment industry where we really provide an escape for people, to be able to think about other things other than their worries. And it's times like this when people gravitate towards games. So I don't necessarily think that necessarily means a slowdown. It actually provides some opportunity for people to engage more with the public and provide them that type of comfort and entertainment.
So why games? What gets you about games? Let's talk about this because there's people. I mean, in fact, one of my students, and I don't mean to keep coming. It's just students are kind of my life right now. So, one of my students, Kevin, he's one of those guys that's kind of on the front line, and it's an interesting front line to be on. He's restocking shelves, and just basically working in a store that looks like it's been hit by a bomb every single day.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, he's working his butt off. He's got all kinds of stuff going on, trying to kind of get through, make himself a job candidate. But, what is it that is so special about this job from your perspective?
Um, I think the interesting thing about games is that um, it's not only the freedom of expression,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to just create things out of your imagination, but if you're willing to commit to the nature of always evolving and learning, and trying to be the best artist you can be, I think that's what is really the most attractive thing about this industry, right? Is after 20 years, I still feel like what's kept me around is instinctively making the rule that every 5 years trying to reinvent myself, right? I'm not a young buck. There's a lot of young, fast, talented kids out there these days. And when it comes down to it, I think whether you're new or old to the industry, uh, you kind of have to give yourself that kind of guideline of, even if you don't change jobs, like figure out ways to improve and to like kind of reinvigorate your passion for the job, right? And so like, I think the reason why I chose games is not only just because I love playing games, but I wanted to be able to not only express myself, but give people that kind of joy that I got from playing these types of games and being able to imagine different types of things and experience different types of worlds, right? And
Mm-hmm.
just get away from it all, right?
Yeah, I get that. And we hear a lot about how the career is a hard one. You have to reinvent yourself a lot. There's
Mm-hmm.
some difficulties to that. But I don't think we hear a ton about like the rewarding aspect of it and what's kind of important.
Mm-hmm.
for us. So I don't really know how to phrase what I'm asking here exactly, but um, like, yeah, I get that it helps. Like we're building things that are a distraction, but like, what's fun about this job? Like, what's the fun stuff? Like, you get in, you're doing this, you're reinventing yourself. You're not a lawyer. You're not going out there and um, becoming a finance geek and all that stuff. Like, what keeps you coming back to games?
I personally think that what kept me in the industry this long is not just the passion for playing what I create or
Mm-hmm.
expressing myself, but just the diversity of people that you meet. And games is a really, ever since I joined the industry, games is a really great way of creating culture around not only supporting your fellow teammates, but the
Yeah.
community as well. Like when I was at Relic, we did a lot of game jams and marathons for raising funds for Children's Hospital, right?
Mm.
And Pixelmatic is very much structured the same way. Even right now we have employees from all over the world, but we're constantly acting as a family, and we're checking in on each other and saying, hey, like, I know you're in Paris, but are you safe? And I know there's a quarantine, and we're all kind of working together with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you know games provides a lot of that, is just like that kind of camaraderie and striving towards creating a product together and having people en masse enjoy it.
That makes a lot of sense. Um, there is always this strong community. So, the other thing you said that got me kind of interested, you started as a 3D animator.
Yeah, I started as a character artist, and
Uh-huh.
then I found that I just want to learn way more about, like, what does it mean to go end to end of a product, right? And
Yeah.
so from character modeling, I started to learn, like, well, I really want to make the best, most believable face I can possibly make. And then so I started to get into animation. And then once I got into animation, I got into, well, oh, you need to make this thing believable. How does it move? And then I got into rigging. And then from there, it just kind of kept going and going and going, because the more I got introduced to new things to learn, I started to solve more things, and people needed more help. And then I would just be the person that helps and teaches everybody on how to make the things that ultimately end up on screen. And so for a good decade, I did that on many different projects,
Mm-hmm.
working with an art director, and extrapolating from what their vision is for that particular SKU or product, and always answering the questions like, okay, but is it doable, and how are we going to do it, and is it performant, is it shippable? And so after a while, like, just doing that job for a very long time, it's now become like, oh, okay, well, I don't need to ask those questions, because I'm the one helping the team actually produce the product and making the decisions. So it's become a lot easier.
That makes sense. And I think you had a bit more on this presentation that you wanted to show, right?
Yeah. So like here, like this is just another example of like how the industry is changing. Like we're starting to see a lot more competitive advantages for both ZBrush and for Blender, and Blender is starting to pick up steam. But you can
Right.
see with this example of one of our ships that this is hard ops, like development and a time lapse, and just how we create our ships. And the great thing about the Blender workflow is it's non-detrimental, right? So we're using this hard ops plugin, as well as we're using some decal plugins. And even in the latest Doom, you can see that things are starting to change from using kit materials in Substance Painter to now using decals, because they're even more performant, and you just have to change how you load things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is just another example of like evolving and continuing to chase, different techniques, as well as like figuring out, okay, how do you load this? How does it become performant, right?
And you're speaking about actual like shapes that you put in on a normal map. That might be, maybe you could explain what a decal is or a decal is, to help people understand, especially relative to this, because what we're seeing right now is everything's put in geometry, correct?
Yeah, and then this would be baked down into a high poly and then lotted into, as many LODs as you would need for the game.
Right.
But then now we're seeing a lot of decal plugins where you would create sculpted meshes, and then you would project them onto simple textures, flat textures, and then you would put those on one texture sheet, and those could all be painted with whether it's a smart material or whether it's a static, just simple one type of material, and then you share those across all of your environment objects, and then that becomes a performance savings. So yeah, like I think I just tweeted the other day about one of the guys on the internet pulled some of that Doom workflow off the Doom Eternal stuff. We're seeing a lot of these types of things start to work their way into workflows now.
It's funny, I see this stuff and I go back to Maya, because Maya is like basically became part of my genetic code.
Yeah.
So hard to learn that.
Yeah.
I see this Maya stuff or this Blender stuff, and I'm like, Maya has, it's evolved a little bit, but nothing like what we see Blender doing. And so a couple of other people I've talked to, one of my friends who's a modeler on films. Now he's looking at Blender as the modeling pipeline.
Yeah. So we haven't, at Pixelmatic, we haven't done away with ZBrush by any means, but we've definitely moved to using Blender for all our environment objects. This playing in the background is just one of the initial trailers when I joined the team, but we've changed the art vision quite substantially. But you can see that all of these models were actually done in Blender, and then. So yeah, like we're adapting now. We're learning a lot of Blender. There's advantages obviously to it being free, but I think that they're really starting to push the envelope and give Autodesk a run for their money, right? Because there's so many things in there that eventually there'll be more crossover between Painter and Blender and ZBrush, and then just phasing out intermediate DCC packages, so digital content creation packages. So yeah.
Did you say phasing them out?
Well, I think that again, like the amount of overlap between Max and Maya even is getting quite crazy, and so like having a one-stop shop in Blender is becoming pretty useful from a production standpoint. So yeah, that's these are the videos that I had, just to give you a little bit of a recap. But then I also had a little bit of a deck to show you guys.
Okay.
And so yeah, like this is just like all of the information about like what it takes to kind of get to the point where you're creating content for an IP. But I think it would be interesting to hear what people's thoughts are on like what does it mean to make game content, right? And so when I joined Pixelmatic, this was kind of like the original vision, and when you think about like what's in the mind of an art director, this will probably help people to understand a little bit more about like what an art director needs to capture in their head and hold in their head as a vision, right? So this is like from that last trailer when I joined the initial concept art, and I think the question for me straight away was like, how do I start to, the same way that people are watching now, how do you start to differentiate yourself in a market, right? How do you make yourself like something that stands out? And so this is even at the highest level, something that art directors and dev teams and creative directors struggle with right now is there's just so much competition out there, even in the games themselves, that you have to find ways to really get your message across, right? So the initial art direction for this from the concept art standpoint is very dark and kind of gritty, right? We're dealing with a lot of when you rip apart essentially the game concept, working with the the design director, the creative director, the art director, the technical director, and lead engineers, and you're trying to figure out like how is this game going to stand out? What are our pillars? It all comes back to this type of stuff, right? And so when you start from even conception, it's just you have to start thinking about those things immediately. And so even translating this concept art into what we had for an initial, this is when I joined the team, about the challenges that you might have on even redoing an IP, a sequel of a game or a new IP, and just growing, whether from it's an indie studio or a AAA studio, to figuring out what your game is about visually as well as gameplay. Yeah. So from this point on, I started to focus on how do we really boil this IP down to the core of what the experience is from a visual standpoint. And what's really important to me is always relating it back to gameplay comes first, right?
Okay.
Because if people can't understand the game itself, then the art really isn't doing its job properly by creating that illusion as well as communicating the intent of the things that are going on. And so I started to look at something that really, what I thought this IP stood for, which is, it was clear to me that there was inspiration from Macross, and from even a little bit of Gundam, but what does it mean at the core of a project? What is that? Was a project trying to communicate to the public, right? And so I right away pivoted to something a little bit more retro, because I think the company itself is just rooted in anime, and really that's where their heart is, but the visuals really weren't speaking that at all.
Interesting. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of it, but I kind of want to understand a little bit more about what this means, the gameplay in art directing.
Yeah.
Because that seems like that's a pretty strong difference between, say, film and, ads and all that stuff.
Absolutely. And so, even working in television, I thought that the talk today would be really a lot more better suited to helping people to understand that when you're working in games, you're creating interactive media.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's most important is not just helping players to learn the mechanics of the game, but helping to enhance that experience with the visuals, right? And so I'll kind of go into this deck a little bit more, just a really simple concept of like the kinds of things that you hopefully, when you get a job, whether you're a contractor or whether you're a full-time employee, will help you to kind of become a better game artist. And so again, like I started on this path of like, okay, how do I make this IP stand out amongst the home worlds and the Star Citizens and the EVE Onlines? And I found that retro is really where the heart of this brand should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started here with my good friend now, Ronan Lafleur, who is also known as the Art of Dufresh on ArtStation. You should go check him out. But we started to really explore like, okay, how do I first pivot on the brand to make sure that people understand what this IP is about? It's not about, the realistic metals, and it's not about, necessarily like the epic like grandeur of space opera. It's about the quintessential anime experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, how do I create a visual around it, but then how do I also support gameplay? And so even though this first iteration from Ron and I was pretty clear about, okay, we're on the right direction. If you put any 80s or 90s retro cartoon music, like I always joke around the office, like this is I could play the old X-Men, soundtrack on this, and it just screams retro. It's like like this is the kind of thing, like when when you're in the zone and you're trying to um, find what your niche is the kinds of things that go through your creative mind, right? But does it really scratch the itch, and does it support gameplay? And we had to push it a little bit further. So as much as this was vibrant and it was contemporary and it was speaking to some of the inspiration, I had to take it a step further. And so this is a really simple example of I just said, well, let's go even further. Let's go even deeper down that road and start to separate ourselves from what's out there on the market. And so instead of being vibrant, you start to look at prioritizing color and making sure that color and the palettes that you're choosing actually allow for you to communicate gameplay in a visual way. And so here you can see not only am I dropping the saturation values of everything, but I'm also creating more focus around the lasers themselves by having them more saturated and being more pop. And so this is what I'm going to continue to talk about today. It's just a small idea that you can start to learn from your art directors, or from just doing experiments in Unity and just or Unreal and just some project yourself, is creating separation between all the different elements so that gameplay is clear, right?
This is I feel like this dovetails with something we talk about. We've been talking about more recently, presentation. Mm-hmm. Because I just had to stack with a conversation with Gavin Gold, and he's talking about how they get 1,000 applicants for each job opening, right? Mm-hmm. And he says 60% of them they cut right away, and the criteria they use to cut is presentation. Mm-hmm. And that tells them whether or not they've got the eye or not. And if they don't have the eye, they can't train for that. But they can certainly train you to go from Maya to Max, for mm-hmm. example. That's not a big deal. ZBrush to Mudbox, Mudbox to ZBrush, whatever. But the eye, right? And so what I'm hearing you say here, this is this intentional word is sticking with me, because it's here you're showcasing the fact that you understand this genre. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you're showing a depth of understanding that's a bit of a trigger. It's a bit of okay, this person gets it. They get who we are. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so this can come in many different forms, right? It's you can have an eye for color. You can have an eye for shape language. Mm-hmm. You can have an eye for other things too. And so when you're displaying a showcase of animation per se, combat animation moveset, right, is the way that you can impress an employee in a demo reel is really making sure that, for example, what's important to the gameplay read. And so a great example is just a charge 3 combo attack animation, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of what combat games do is, whether it's Devil May Cry, whether it's even Dragon Ball, is making sure that you antic and you hold on that last pose for impact. And the minute somebody watches an animation reel where that stuff isn't present and everything is floaty, that's a cut criteria right there, right? Is if you're making a demo reel or a portfolio for games, you need to be able to understand what the end goal is for what you're trying to showcase. And there's many ways that you can get that information, right? You can certainly learn it at school, but after you graduate from school, while you're trying to find a job, the community in general, whether it's on forums or whether it's on social media, is super willing to help everybody else out, right? And so just firing off quick messages to people on Twitter even, you can get real small tidbits of information that are going to help you to find out what's important. Start following people that inspire you, start watching all of their gifts, and you'll kind of start to pick things up. But have an open dialogue with the community, because it's one of the most friendly, embracing communities that I've ever had to work with, right? So nostalgic, right? So this, if you compare this to this, is we're really hitting on nostalgic now, right? And we're starting to like build this IP back up from these dark grays and worrying about lighting and separation of visuals into something that is more, we're going to live within the realm of vibrant and nostalgic. Um, and then, so again, how does this relate back to, you know, making a game? It's great to make pretty art, but it's not functional by any means. Whether it's a face, whether it's you know, an effect, it all has to relate back to building a game and helping to convey what the gameplay is, right? And so, what I wanted to just show you guys today is just a small thing that I was teaching the team about when I first joined, which is you know, how to take something like this as just an example of like how do you process this as a gamer? Can you even process this when you look at this in motion? Like how much is going on here, right? And even taking the concept, starting to teach them, you know, this is a lot more clear, right? And so what we were talking about when it comes to revisiting the initial vision is like use the values and the saturation and the motion of all of the things that you're creating to create clear gameplay. And this is different for every single different genre in games, right? There's third person, there's first person, there's RTS, and I've worked in both third person and RTS, but there's different requirements. So again, is when you're applying for a job, is if you're living within the third person action space, you're going to be looking for different things to showcase than you're going to be looking for in an RTS. For this game in particular, it is about, you know, like Infinite Fleet it's a large spaceship battle tactical MMO where you kind of explore procedural space, you customize the fleet, and you fight AI, but it's about an army en masse. And when everything is firing on all four cylinders, how do you process that as a gamer is the kind of things that I need to think about as an art director, right? So then, like, this is how I kind of explained it to the team, right? Is if even if you have you know, a super far away camera and you have tens of thousands of ships on screen, well, not thousands because it's pretty hard to on even today's machines, but if you have hundreds of units on screen, how does a player quickly understand what is going on in the game? Where's the threats coming from? What units have abilities on, what don't? How can I counter this unit with this ability? Like, these all have to come down to how the art is being communicated, right? And so in this example here is just taking that concept art. This is what I've been trying to push for in the new art vision, is that these white spots in particular, the effects are priority number one, right? And so you make sure that all those have high saturation values, they pop on screen, and then the gray becomes priority number two, and you drop the saturation levels and you make that the next layer. And then you deprioritize unless it's a key point in the game, like an objective or something, you deprioritize everything else and you drop it back, whether it's with you know, the depth or like fog or anything like that. Use all the tricks to kind of push all those things back into the background. So again, if you go from here, and if you imagine this as in-game, you should be able to really clearly see what is going on if you think about it in this respect.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know how much we can continue to like keep teaching graduates or people that are learning how to get into the game industry about, you know, it's not necessarily just about the art, but it's about like, if your passion is games, is you got to be asking the questions and inquisitive. And I think that's what makes a valued employee as well, is knowing the right questions to ask, showing the engagement, showing that you understand what you're building and it's benefiting the design of the game, as well as the creative vision.
Well, let's flip the script then, if you don't mind, and talk about the negative. because that's one thing that says, okay, you got to do this. Sometimes it's hard for people to understand exactly what that means and when they're not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the triggers that tell you somebody's not like hitting the mark? So you're hiring for Pixelmatic. I don't know if you're hiring or not. I'm just saying, assuming you're hiring for Pixelmatic, what are the triggers, the things that say, okay, this person did not do their research. They are not understanding, our motif and who we are. Um, so they're not going to be a candidate for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for starters, obviously, like if the person has a realistic demo reel and you're looking for something that's more anime centric, you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at the things like proportions and style in general that they're interested in.
Right.
I think it's pretty staple for interviewers to ask, what are their interests, but I think we don't concentrate enough on like when you're in an interview, like knowing really like how passionate you are about those things, and before you even apply, like really having that as something that is ingrained in who you are as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it's difficult obviously to find a job that perfectly matches your interests, but at the same time, like it's gonna definitely show if you're showcasing things that aren't relevant to the position, right?
Yeah.
um, and so I always like to see, even from the beginning of an art project, like what contributed to the end product that's in a portfolio. Even on the job now, after 20 years, I'm still teaching senior and lower, sometimes even principal level employees about like how to create a layered approach of developing an asset, right? Is you always need to do your reference gathering and you need to do your gray box. And then only do you first validate your gray box in the game, or when it comes to readability and silhouette, do you then proceed to the next stage. And you'd be surprised at how many people skip those first two steps. They go still to an end product where
Mm-hmm.
that's where the danger is that you end up really missing the mark on like what was the most important part. Oh, the most important part is that this character needs to be inverse triangle shape, so they need to be top heavy, right? And so like I would love to see in future like more schools teach that type of thing. Is like you're developing an asset, or you're developing even a concept for something that is pertinent to a certain type of game, and then what do we pay attention to, right?
Totally. Yeah, we're actually well, anyways, I'll save that for later. So the there's something I just lost it. There was something I kind of wanted to hit on there in terms of the intentionality of that and passion. It's that job interview. I mean, those are painful for a lot of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're arbitrary, because it's like you got this moment. Maybe it's 15 minutes, maybe it's an hour to try to sum up this person. It's high risk, high stakes. The person gets the job, they don't. You get an employee that works for you. You get an employee that you're going to have to let go in a month, which is never a positive thing. So it's a high risk moment. And it tends to create this artificiality. It's like people are in there. They're like, okay, so, I got to show this. I got to show this. I got to have this answer for, as you said, I got to have this answers for my interests. So I'm interested in
Mm-hmm.
this. I'm interested in that. What kind of recommendations or what tips do you give people going into that job interview so that they can show, their authentic self?
Um, so I think the easiest thing for showing your authentic self is just try to relax and just try to not necessarily have an agenda of what you want to sell yourself on,
Mm-hmm.
but just be natural. And just even if you get caught in a position where you're on the spot and we're talking about things that maybe you're not interested in,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, explain what you are interested in and how that actually relates to being a good candidate for the job. The other thing that has really been blowing me away in the last 5 years, especially with engines becoming so much more accessible, is um, like an instant, like I need to relook at this guy, or I need to keep this portfolio, is when whether they're veteran or whether they're new to the industry, just fooling around with an engine and seeing their art functioning in game, that just blows my mind, right? I've had guys that I've interviewed at previous jobs where it's just like, we're talking about, the importance of camera and contextualizing your art relative to camera. And they had no tick boxes at all for like, do you know like what's important for like how to create content for an inventory system, and being able to customize a character, and like what do you need to know for like number of maximum influences on a bone for skinning and stuff like that. But they weren't able to answer all those. But the minute they told me, oh, and I made a Diablo-esque video game and here's my art in it and I did some level design, that definitely perks my interest of like, oh, okay, this guy is way more capable in other areas that are of interest to him, and being able to display that is like huge, right?
That's great. So leverage, like just don't focus on just the skills and just the model and just that, but start to leverage, whatever other interest you have to make sure that you're really giving this some power. So if somebody makes an environment, do some walkthroughs, do some VFX, put some characters in it, things like that.
Yeah, even if it's not perfect, and maybe you're using a couple, marketplace assets for just navigating the world that you built, but showing like, oh, I actually put this end to end into Unity, and I exported all my stuff from Painter, and these are the presets I use, and I actually got it into the game, and this is what it runs at, and I did some basic lighting on it. Like these are huge now in terms of separating yourself from other candidates.
That makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, we are coming up on our time. So I guess I got a couple more questions that I want to ask to help. I don't know if you've got more. Oh, I love that model.
Yeah. So this is some stuff that we're working on. Like, so we talked about this, right? Prioritizing gameplay and values. Yeah. And now we're past the point of like, okay, well, we know that we want, this visual to stand out, and then how do we balance that with VFX? And so this is just an example of some of the stuff that we're working on, a little sneak peek. And then this is like, as we take it a step further, how do we get closer to this and not this, right? With consistent lighting. And so now we start to look at not only using PBR materials to standardize all of our values, but we're doing some look dev now. Right? And then the hope is that, go end to end and you can have an experience like this, but everything is clear, right? So obviously these green lasers are from the enemy, these orange lasers are from your team, and then you can separate everything out. You can parse everything out from like what is happening in a giant battle.
Where are you doing your look dev? Blender or?
We do a lot of our look dev in Unity. Okay. With custom shaders. So we're right now we're doing look dev with our new skyboxes, HDRI, HDRP in Unity, and then just mashing everything together and then starting to tweak all of our post-processing.
Nice. Great. Well, I got a few more questions that I want to run. Do you have more here that you wanted to present though?
No, I'm good.
Okay, great. So the next thing would be, because we're a school, so and you've been in this industry 20 years, I think you said, right?
Yeah.
And you've done everything from 3D animation to now art director. And you do hiring when the company's hiring.
Yep.
So what advice, just in broad general perspective here, what advice do you have for people who are looking to get started? And I mean, like, they haven't necessarily graduated from college. They don't even know what program they're going to take or how they're going to educate themselves, to the whole deal. Just they're looking at this and they're like, the career my mom wants me to do is not, like, I'm just not happy with that. Yeah. And then I want to tack on to that, like, people that have been trying and what we have to do. But why don't we just start with people that are brand new? They're looking at this and they're like, this looks cool. I want to do this. I don't know how to get started.
Yeah. I think also another thing to throw in there is obviously cost, right?
Yeah, that's a big part. Yeah.
When I started to go to school at VFS, it was much cheaper then. I was class 21, but the cost was only like 16K, I think. And now like tuitions are pretty high. So when you're trying to convince your parents or you're trying to take a student loan out for these types of things, these are the things that cross your mind, right?
Totally.
But I think the best way to start is not only look for a school that offers competitive curriculum and a great structure, but don't be afraid to just grab indie versions of software, whether it's Houdini, whether it's Maya. Like just use those first free months and just start experimenting in things and do online tutorials and prep yourself for specialization for when you actually save up the money or when you enroll or get accepted to a course. There's so many options out there now with just being able to get in there and get your hands dirty, and most of the software developers have them for free for trial periods. So
right.
The best thing you can do is start to follow great tutorials, focus on a particular package, try other like multiple packages, and then just get dirty with it right away. And then when it comes to even like going a step further, is don't be afraid to share your work, whether it's WIP or final. Social media is great for that. Is just being able to put yourself out there and get noticed, and then get feedback and start to improve yourself on that free trial period stuff.
And what about those that have been trying to get into the industry for a while and maybe they've gone to school?
I would say don't give up, and just make sure that again you utilize your different avenues to market yourself. You got to keep updating your resume, obviously, and try different things. If you feel that your resume is not getting traction, don't get stuck in just making the same types of things, the same types of style over and over, right? Again, it comes down to standing out. So push yourself to try different techniques, as well as like do a different style of a character, right?
Right.
I think if you take an analogy, everybody does a MOBA or everybody does a battle royale. So there's in my opinion, this is the same with our IP now. Is like, what's the harm in doing an experiment and going the complete opposite direction? Make something that people completely aren't expecting and try your best at that.
Yeah, I get that. All right, and how do people find you?
So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at WayneWongChong.com. I would totally be okay with sharing my email too. It's WayneWongChong, all one word, at yahoo.ca. I'm more than willing to answer any questions and help people to, get their resumes up and kind of get out there, because I think it's important to give back to the community.
Awesome, Wayne, man. Thank you so much for spending the time and for helping to distract us.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
Absolutely. It's great to meet you and to hear your insights and all that stuff. I really, really appreciate it.
No problem. And stay safe out there, everybody.
All right. Will do.
Okay.
All right, guys. Take care. Leave a comment down below this video. Let me know what is one thing that you really picked up on this. Remember, and make sure to share these for other people that are, could use the conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to you all later. All right. So I want to thank you so much for being here and taking the time to listen to this podcast. And I want to ask a couple of things from you. Number one, make sure you leave a comment or you rate this on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever that you're listening to this. It really makes a big difference in helping us get the word out and to help people understand what we do. The other thing is, I want to make sure that you know where to find us. Head over to www.vertexschool.com to learn about all the programs that we have for creatives. Our job at Vertex School is to teach you new skills in creative tech and help you get a job that matters to you. We lock in on the specific skills and triggers that people are looking for in the industry and what you need to do to prove that you can do this job. We're taking applications right now, so make sure that you head over to www.vertexschool.com and apply today. All right, again, thank you so much for being here. Have an amazing day.